Uh, I think objectivity is chapter 4.
Mm-hmm. Okay, objectivity. And I will open up my notes that I had.
Cool.
Let's get yours from yesterday. Chapter 4. Yep, got it.
Can see you in as well. Cool.
I think really the essential thing about objectivity is finding that the truth of something, regardless of your opinions or feelings on it, just the fact of the matter.
Well, that was part of what the original wiki entry said.
Yes.
Although,
but the disagreement comes in what it means by subjectivity and what it means by bias. That's what can vary among people. But objectivity is like we're getting at the truth of the matter. That's not, it's just how things are, aside from how you want it or wish it to be.
but
Pretty
then
straightforward.
the concept culture, could that be objective? Like, what would that be if it's the fact of the, what is it in that sense? Like, where does the essence of culture being that it's fact of the matter come in?
That's where it gets trickier because we're talking about man-made things versus the metaphysical facts of things.
Yeah.
I mean, you could say that culture is you can form the concept objectively with regard to like some observation about the way people operate together. There may be very many subjective elements of culture, but that isn't to say like the concept of culture is subjective. I mean, people can have subjective would be more like emotion, things that aren't determined by the fact of the matter as much as almost determined by your consciousness in a way.
Right.
So like we were saying about primacy of existence, that takes precedence over any feelings and opinions you might have about reality. But subjective would be more about what's foreign from merely the how things strike you and how things feel. And an objective method would be some way of directing your consciousness so that you aren't just using that kind of primacy of consciousness, how do things feel, but you're finding and creating a method to apprehend reality as it is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we have methods like an objective method of concept formation, as opposed to like a subjective method, which might be just whatever strikes you as relevant, you just put it together without regard to any particular fact. It was only reliant on your subject, your feeling.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just trying to think of an example of something that I wanted to bring up. Oh yeah, I do remember in the chapter they said that objective is, it's like fact of the matter, but they emphasize fact of the matter as processed by human consciousness. So then you can get the concepts of culture.
Yeah.
They Yeah,
Let's see.
they said that. So, and then the fundamental characteristic you said is.
Sorry, can you say that question again?
Yeah, it's all good. I was just waiting. The fundamental characteristic then you said is that it is fact of the matter, or I wrote product of consciousness. I wasn't really sure.
Well, product of consciousness, that wouldn't really fit into either subjective or objective. That could, well, I'll put it this way. Some people think any product of consciousness would be subjective.
Yeah.
That any interference of you as an individual would be non-objective. I mean, that's one way some people have.
Yeah.
But for objectivism, a product of consciousness is not necessarily subjective.
Mm-hmm.
We need to direct our consciousness in a way that uses objective methods. That a concept is a product
Okay.
of your consciousness, but you can create an objective definition or objectively create a concept.
Okay.
It's about the method that you direct your consciousness.
Okay. I got confused there with because the original question what's the fundamental characteristic of concept, and then I wrote product of consciousness. But then because a
That would
concept
make
can be
sense.
objective, non-objective, and so
Yes.
a concept is broader than objective or non-objective is the standard. I think it said earlier in the chapter it's a normative term, which I guess
Yes.
is the norm is, as you said, what is the fact of the matter.
Yeah, or at least using the standards of objectivism, being that they should be use fact of the matter and things like that.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
A relationship.
Well, I mean, I said that here, or is it a relationship? But I guess a
Yes.
norm is a relationship, right? Or a
Yeah.
norm is a standard, and then when you judge it, that's the relationship to the standard. So fundamental of objectivity is a. Oh, actually, wouldn't it be a norm? The fundamental of objectivity is a norm or a standard, and the standard itself is like, how does that fit when I think in terms of this conceptual, like what is the fundamental characteristic? What is the genus and species? Like, if objectivity is a norm or a standard, then isn't that the genus, the genus or genus, whatever?
I'm thinking.
And then fact of the matter is wait, the norm is the fact of the matter, but I don't know. I'm getting confused.
No, I
But
think the genus would be like the descriptive term of what is objective. It just means like fact of the matter. But a normative would be more narrow, and like the species of it. Like, well, what type of fact of the matter? There's all these different ways of seeing objectivity from a Kantian view, which is like disinterest, as in take yourself out of the equation, to complete subjectivity, where there objectivity is impossible. Everything's just a feeling and emotion. Or that'd be one way of thinking of objectivism, would be that here's a method of concept formation that we use that would create an objective connection to reality. That you're connecting the fact of how your consciousness exists with the facts of existence. You're trying to find that relationship, that a valid relationship between the two, that which gets complicated, but that's why you use the method. That's methods of objectivity help you get at facts of the matter and what is the case and things like that.
Okay. So I guess because objectivity, the concept will the word is the same, but the concept will vary depending on context. So objectivity can be a method, which is following reason and logic to reach a concept, or it could be describing the relationship of a concept or the relationship of a concept to reality, where the norm is fact of the matter, as you said. So in that sense, there's different concepts within the same word. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
That's a bit of a complex principle, but I think you got starting to get the hang of it. So
Yeah.
that sounds about right.
And then if I'm looking at the concept objectivity referring to the norm, then wouldn't genus be the norm and the species be a fact of the matter? Because the norm can be anything, right? And then the species is more narrow. If I'm looking at just the norm, not the method, which is that you said the method was, I mean, that's a different thing.
Yeah, that could work.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think I think you have a point there. I would maybe do a little differently, but I don't think
How?
I think you're thinking of it fine, but I would just organize it differently in my head. Like, I think more in terms of just the broad definition, and just and objectivism sees it as all about method. I don't think it's a distinction that matters too much.
Mm-hmm.
I think it works fine in your head, and that's fine for where we're working with.
But what do you mean? You just see that there's one concept called that's a method. Is that?
What I mean is to say that when objectivism talks about objectivity usually is all about methods of consciousness. It's not like some inherent relationship or
Oh, okay.
something that's merely there. I mean, when we're referring to consciousness anyway,
Yeah.
we objectivity as a method is what objectivism usually is concerned about. How do we find out morality objectively? How do we find about concepts objectively? Like there's all these methods out there, and in general many people will agree, yeah, you want your concepts and thinking to be objective. But there's still disagreement on, well, how do we make them objective? And some people just disagree on, is it possible, and to what extent your own consciousness should be involved.
Right. And you brought up Kant as an example.
Yes.
So okay, let's use the method, the concept of method. What would be the genus and the species or whatever?
Well, you could say genus is method, species objectivity.
Oh, okay.
That would
Ah,
work.
okay. Um, but then you're using the word in the species.
Yeah, I mean, you could have it like there's method, then objectivity, then objectivity is a normative concept. And that'd be like each one more narrow.
Okay. All right, let's have a look at what else I got in here, so we don't we've got tons. When I go through
Yeah.
objectivist epistemology, we can get
Yeah,
into this.
I think you had the right idea.
Yeah. Um. All right, skip that. Okay, no, you answered that. So knowledge can be non-objective. Well, actually, knowledge itself, if something consider, is there a distinction to be made between like objective and non-objective knowledge, or is something that is non-objective just not considered knowledge? Like if it's not reflective of reality, then like God, for example, is that knowledge?
Mm, it, yes, I would say so.
Okay.
But that's more a matter of we're not trying to determine whether something's knowledge based on some omniscient standard. It's not like I say the ancient Greeks knew nothing because about physics because Aristotle was wrong about it. It doesn't mean, oh, he didn't know anything really. I mean, in some sense, yeah, he doesn't know what we know now. He just doesn't have that knowledge. But it isn't to say it wasn't even knowledge. It would be more to say that knowledge would be about, given all the information around you and your realm of existence and all that, are you using some method to get at that awareness and knowledge, like using some standard, I guess.
But that standard could be emotion then, if it's not specified.
Right. Which, if you were saying that, can quote unquote knowledge based on emotion really be knowledge, I would say no, because I mean, it wouldn't be referring to what we think of as knowledge, as in like what we understand about the world and how it is and the way the world works. It wouldn't really provide that, um, but I wouldn't call that even knowledge if it was that kind.
Okay.
The hard part is you don't want to say that not having the right idea means you have no knowledge. I mean, Aristotle had knowledge about things, even if he was completely wrong about some things. Um, it's about the method used to get there. I would say if you don't even use a method of objectivity, no, it wouldn't be knowledge. There's nothing about it we would even consider to be knowledge. It would just be like thoughts, merely thoughts. It's not, you're not making it more specific than a thought. That's what I would argue.
So as long as it's conceptual, whether it's reached through emotion or whether it's reached through false reasoning, then it's considered knowledge. It doesn't mean it's true, but you think then that would be knowledge.
I would say that knowledge is just something that you arrive at through some method of understanding the truth. And I wouldn't consider using emotion really. Well, that's a tough argument, I think. But I
Mm.
think the bottom line is that if you're using some method and you believe it to be true and understand it to be true and really reasoned it out, sure, it can be knowledge.
So then your
I might,
standard is reason. So knowledge is,
yes,
all right, knowledge is some conclusion reached through reason.
or just
Otherwise, it's
thinking, I would say. That's how I would prefer to say it. That what is knowledge is still a hard question. I mean, there's many
we can get
ways to
more,
approach it, but
if you want, we can get more, I'll write it down and we can get more deeply into it in the reason chapter because I feel like that might be
yeah,
a,
you're right. We should save that.
okay, let's
That's safe
get,
for later.
and I can think about it more as well. So I will just copy that into my spare notepad here. I've got, uh, done.
I was just distinguishing between methods that get at the wrong thing versus methods that are just about not even about thinking.
What can you give me an example? So, like, what methods, other than in this case, the claim being made is that it's objectivity, what other methods would,
You could have, I can imagine somebody could have a method that they're just using intuition and say anything that comes from intuition is knowledge. That intuition is inherently correct. I imagine somebody could argue that. But then I would say, well, that's not knowledge because it's referring to things that just happen. They're unguided. I would say the minimum of something being knowledge is that you've guided it deliberately to get to that point. You've guided your thinking deliberately. As opposed to intuition wasn't, it's not really you guiding your thinking. It just kind of happens. You didn't guide it or direct it, it just appeared,
well, I'm
more
not
or less.
really aware of, like, so, okay, let's guiding your knowledge, what would be the standard for the guide, like, other than objectivity to reach, like, what, I don't know, I haven't read Aristotle, for example, so what would be,
Um,
like,
well, any way of directing your consciousness, I think, would be sufficient. There might be worse methods than others, but as long as you're directing your thinking, I think it should count as knowledge, generally speaking. But I would say though, we'll just from this point though, we'll just
yeah,
leave it aside.
that's fine. I'll write that down as well. Uh, guided thinking. I'll write that down so we can pick it up another time. That's fine. Okay, let me cross out this. So what is wrong with that? Let's see. In contrast to perception, conceptualization is not an automatic reaction. A stimuli is not a passive gazing that awaits infallible imprinting on the mind of some external entity. Let me just see what question I asked. Uh, okay. I don't know if this question will make sense to you, but because um,
Mm-hmm.
what I was thinking about was when all these claims are made in the book, like for even this one, for example, conceptualization is not automatic reaction to stimuli. I sometimes catch myself thinking, well, how do we know that there's no concept that has been automatically formed? And so I thought, like, okay, yeah, I can observe some I need to think about, but there are others that I don't seem to have thought about at all. So how do I know they were consciously formed? And then I said, so this is an inference, right? Like we, on the basis of a few observations, we say, yeah, a lot of our concepts we need to think about. We don't just automatically form. Therefore, it is, we think the rest of them are also thought about, even if we can't remember thinking about them. And so one, the question was, um, like when you make a statement like this, is this what's considered inference? Because you don't necessarily know, at least I don't know that all my concepts, I don't go, oh yeah, chair, I remember thinking about that and reaching the concept chair at that point. And this is what I thought. I don't remember, I just have it. And so, yeah, one is this inference. And then two, I mean, the statement here is that inference, and then two is what do you think of that? Where there's like some concepts we don't, remember forming. They're just like, I can't remember thinking about it.
Yeah. Um, we're referring to. I would say to a large degree, yes. Um, when you're forming concepts, though, well, to say that no concept is from an automatic reaction to stimuli. Yeah, I think to some extent it's an inference based on these claims about the nature of consciousness, the nature of free will, that we can't. You could have some ideas for sure that might be automatic or something like that. But when we're talking about conceptualization, we are talking about any. In this case, we're talking about non-automatic processes. I mean, I think that's just what we're talking about anyway. So like it's almost more like a pedagogical point that he's making here, that he's making a contrast for you to understand what he's referring to. He's saying that the processes that are not conceptualization is a directed process using free will. And that's just he's just saying, well, just by definition, it's not an automatic reaction. This is just how we're organizing this way of thinking. And sure, I think you should, of course, then bring up counterexamples why you think, oh, maybe I shouldn't think concepts as, maybe I should think of concepts sometimes as automatic reactions. Or you could say to Peikoff, well, I don't think your distinction is coherent here because of this flaw in your reasoning, or here's a reason to think that conceptualization has nothing to do with free will. But based on the previous chapters, he's already been presenting why we should think that we need methods of directing our mind. We need methods of objectivity. So anything conceptualization is at least the parts we can control, the aspects of where we can find objective knowledge. And that's what he wants to focus on. You could theoretically be right. There's certain concepts and quotes that are not directed, but that's not what he's really talking about here. We are just trying to talk about strictly the methods we can control, and that those methods do get us that objectivity, that it is sufficient for objective knowledge to do these things. There's not like outside things we need to do in addition to, or that as long as free will and the nature of consciousness is here, then we can conceptualize in this under this philosophical theory.
Okay. Yeah, he did say objectivity concerns itself with, well, objectivity as a method exists because of the volitional and fallible nature of consciousness, where we can make mistakes. So that question arises of how do you reach knowledge and validate it? And so but it concerns itself with the volitional aspect of consciousness. Although here, I didn't get that impression. I mean, I could bring up the context, but I got the impression that he's saying all concepts, which I'm not disputing. I'm just saying it's got to be, if you're saying that, it's got to be inference based on something, because I can't introspect it and validate that myself. So,
yeah, I would just say it's about, he's presenting a framework of thinking, and this framework would imply that if you did come up with a concept that is automatic, you would have to present your case just as much. Under this framework and with the other premises, this is what it would mean. This is what conceptualization would be. And if you did start talking about like automatically formed concepts, are you actually starting to disprove or argue against the actual premises underneath it?
well, they're not. Yeah, I'm not even saying they're automatically formed. I'm just saying that's the appearance, because they're definitely with emotions. I don't think it's directly observable as well. That it's it was that and that thought. That's why I feel this. It's like it's very much you don't know. Sometimes you just feel something. It is a process of inference to say thoughts in the long run lead to emotional reactions.
In a
It's the
way, this
same.
is like beginning with identification and differentiation to begin with. Like you're just pointing out, oh, here's all these observations of the world, and now I'm categorizing them. I'm
Mm.
putting them into little compartments, and from there I'm reasoning with them. And you're just saying, well, how do I know this is the right way to put them in their compartments? Um, well, that's kind of what this whole chapter is about. Like, how do you figure out how you put them in the right place? You're resting on these earlier premises about consciousness and reality. We've already. I mean, this is kind of like the method of doing philosophy that we've kind of been going over since the beginning of the book. Like, it's always about like. I mean, OPAR is about presenting the whole structure in order. It's not necessarily the order you'll go into to actually learn everything. Just here's a well organized book with all the almost in a deductive way, which is fine as long as you know that's what it's doing. So you would almost begin with anyway understanding that, like with philosophy, who needs it, that kind of essay, like you're organizing the world, you're making observations of how things are different or the same, and you would almost be working off of epistemology first. That yeah, when we're doing philosophy in the style of objectivism, we are beginning with like these categorizations, and then we reason about them, which is very Aristotelian.
Can you? I didn't. Sorry, I didn't. I was listening, but I didn't really follow some of that. So one is, what did you say? OPA is order all or something, and then it's deductive, and then I
Yeah,
didn't get the tie into philosophy. Who needs it?
well,
Yeah.
OPAR is it's just organizing everything in kind of a deductive way, I would
What
say,
do you mean?
because like it's just going from like in a straight line from metaphysics to politics. Like it's
Ah,
not
okay.
really like not the process you would necessarily go through when you're learning. It helps to organize your thinking, that's for sure. But it's
Oh,
not
that's.
necessarily that's how I think of it.
Do you remember when I asked you what's the entry point to philosophy? That's what I was wondering about. Like, if I'm, because it was like ordered like that, metaphysics, epistemology. I thought, like, where do you actually start? But anyway, yeah, okay, I get what you're saying.
And then philosophy who needs it being more like when you read that essay, it's more like this is where you're kind of entering in from, and you're just talking like, oh well, we have a way of doing philosophy to begin with, even that we're doing like categorization and things like that. And
So
I could see
philosophy who needs
a
it is
rabbit.
similar. It's like you're saying it's also deductive.
No, I'm saying it's not. That's more like that philosophy who needs it is more like approaching it more from a realistic way, not realistic, but a way that you would naturally be thinking about philosophy. Like we're almost beginning with what is philosophy in the first place. Like when you ask what is philosophy, you're not just answering, oh, it starts metaphysics in here on. You're just describing that whole system. I mean, you're describing like this is what philosophy is, what it does, and I mean this is the method that objectivism uses to do philosophy. Like we're categorizing things is a big part of it.
Okay, I follow. And what you earlier on, quite a bit earlier on, you said some ideas are automatic. What can you think of some that you think are automatic?
Well, what was the context I said that? Do you know when I said it was automatic?
Yeah, I just got to you. So, we were talking. I was talking about like I can't remember forming cup like with a concept
Oh,
and
right.
you were like maybe you were saying that about what I was saying. I don't know, but you did at one point say some ideas are automatic. Some ideas. Oh, no, you said yes. So I think you used ideas in a sense different from concept, and I was just curious what that meant because some ideas are automatic. I was like, what is that?
Well, I may have meant it like some ideas just pop in your head. that may have been it. Also, I could have been saying that when we form a very basic concept at that level, it might not be as directed as other concepts. I wouldn't say automatic, but maybe it's just you've done it so quickly, it's as if you were it's automatic. That's the best I can think of what I probably meant.
I understand. And then, would you make a distinction between an idea and a thought then in that context? Like,
I wouldn't.
no, you wouldn't. And an idea would just be like an image pop up, that kind of thing. Like, if you have an association, would you say that's an idea?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I don't see a reason to distinguish them, so
Yeah.
pretty much synonymous.
All right, we could probably move on from, um, in order to conceptualize, a man must expend effort. He must engage in the kind of mental work that no stimulus can necessitate. He must struggle to relate, connect, process an ever-growing range of data, and he must learn to do it correctly. To think is to process, I'm writing, and then I guess I'm just getting at like, all right, what is actual mental work? Is it just to ask a question, or what are the components of? I think I actually found something later, like that sort of answered that. I'll see if I can find it. But yeah, the question was, what's a mental process? I can think of one more. It's accessing memories as well, would be part of, and there's effort required to access memories and try and, I guess even asking a question takes effort. But yeah, do you know what I'm getting at? Like, what are the components of this thought process that requires effort? So asking questions, accessing memories. Is there anything else?
I'll just say everything I'm thinking of what this would be part
Yeah.
of. So mental work would be like, well, integration, differentiation, um, accessing a memory, recalling a memory, um, making an association, um, problem solving. Like, I mean, imagine what you do when you
I'm gonna write some of that down. Yeah.
um, say if you're doing a crossword. I mean, that kind of problem solving. I mean, the work you might do with that is like, oh, I'm trying to find a memory of this that's related to this concept, or I'm trying to find a synonym. I mean, those are sort of things like mere stimuli. We're not going to make that appear because you kind of need it. It's a process where it had to be directed in some way. So really anything that directs your thoughts that don't just merely happen. Like when you
Yeah.
ask a question, you're trying to get information out of it. When you're accessing a memory, you're trying to. Sometimes that could be a stimulus thing, but also you can be deliberately trying to remember something. It's like when I ask you, oh, can you tell me what you ate for dinner yesterday? And then you stop for a minute and think that would be the deliberate process I'm talking about, as opposed to you're walking outside and then a bird flies by and it makes you imagine an eagle all of a sudden too. Like that's not really that would be necessitated by stimulus. It's just the stimulus made the memory activate. But that's in contrast to when you're say you're alone in your room, you're just trying to recall something. That's different.
So the key or the essence was deliberate, and then which means like a directed or focused consciousness. I guess that's all philosophy will do. It'll give me the broad sweep. But all these,
Yeah.
I'm realizing this question is probably it's more for specialized science because it's like remember that post when David was talking about the units of language, and that's not a question. Like you start with the words, not the units of sounds. So this is probably one of those. There's something similar here where like I'm asking a question that's like this is psychology. It's not
Mm-hmm.
philosophy, right? Philosophy would just say it's just a process of directing and focusing your consciousness.
Essentially.
Yeah, okay. Peikoff I found a formulation. Uh, I'll paste it in the, I thought it was pretty cool.
Let's see.
That's not a direct quote, but obviously.
Yeah.
And so what is it? Identifying it, and that can consist of a lot of things. And then so what? Like identifying implications, which is integration.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to find where this quote was in OPAR. I'm looking on page 111. He must struggle to relate, connect, process.
Which quote? The one I?
Yeah.
You can search it. Like Kindle has search. So if you just search thought is identification and with not with the ampersand, and then you'll definitely find the
Okay.
yeah.
His identification. Let's see. Yeah, thought is identification and integration, the asking of what and then so what. Yeah, I think that's a good way to phrase things. Yeah, that's a clear way to say it.
Very condensed. I like
Very.
it. Okay.
Let's see. Concepts are condensations. Yep.
I got a good question for you coming up.
Yeah.
Concepts are condensations of data formed by a volitional process. I'll paste it in the chat and then I'll read it.
Yeah.
Concepts are condensation of data formed by a volitional process in accordance with a human method. Let's see, I'll skip some here. At the same time, the method, properly employed, conforms at each step to the facts. Otherwise, it would be irrelevant to a cognitive need. Man, therefore, cannot project the products of this method outward into reality apart from man, nor could he detach them from reality either. Such products represent a special kind of union. They represent reality as possessed by a volitional human consciousness. And then I ask, okay, so we're fallible, which means we can have false knowledge, knowledge that does not represent to us the facts as they are. And then I think that was facts as they are is the way you said it. And then objectivity is there to help us prevent reaching false knowledge if the method is followed. And so my question is, does that mean that if you perfectly followed a method of objectivity, you've reached an infallible conclusion?
No, because as far as what we take into account for knowledge using context, you could say it's infallible as far as this moment in time,
Yeah, okay.
but
I think
it's
I'm
based
muddling
on
concepts there.
what's around you at the time. Objectivism would usually focus on, given everything you know now and all the information available now, this is the answer you come to. Infallible would sound to mean that right now, everything you came to understand will never alter in any sense or form. That exactly what you know now will apply forever and always and not change in any sense. That's what infallible would usually mean to me. Or you could say, given everything you have, you can attain certainty that you are not wrong.
Okay,
But
yeah.
that's different than saying you're infallible.
Right,
If you
right.
follow them faithfully and accurately and exactly right, yes, your knowledge will be certain. You have every justification to be certain
Yeah.
and justified and correct and all that.
Yeah, okay. I can see how this goes back to, remember yesterday we talked about like when I was asking about um like how do I know I'm actually making a choice? And we talked about, or no, I didn't ask that. That was one thing I asked, but we talked about it was something I was smuggling in a concept. I was like asking about automatic objectivity or something like that. But the whole point of objectivity was the concept depends on volition. And so I was like using volition and then undoing it with saying automatic objectivity. And I think I'm doing something similar here with infallibility. Like the whole point of objectivity is that there's no infallibility, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, but it is interesting. I'm seeing a pattern there and like the concepts. I'm like smuggling stuff in that doesn't fit. But I get what you're saying because that's in the reason chapter. They talk about certainty a lot, but certainty is contextual, which is super interesting. So yeah, it's not
Yes.
infallible, but you can reach a certain conclusion, is what we're saying, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
You
it
can
makes
reach
sense.
certainty
Yeah.
using these methods.
Ah, cool. Okay. I'll just quickly check the example. Okay, so I'll copy that and then I'll work out the question as I go. I've just sort of glanced at it. On the one hand, according to objectivism, essences are not attributes marked out by nature apart from man. Essential is not a metaphysical but an epistemological term. Essential designates characteristics that perform a certain function in connection with human conceptualization. The function is to differentiate and condense various bodies of data, and the characteristics that perform this function in one cognitive context may not do so in another. Since the category of essence arises because of a need of man's consciousness, the essential in each context has to reflect the state of human knowledge. So I was looking for examples of like where is a concept where it has um, different like the same thing, the same entity, but it is used in like the characteristics that you use to form that concept are different in different cognitive contexts. I was trying to work out like um, some examples of the same entity. I didn't know how to word it, so I just said entity being deemed as like different parts of it are essential in different contexts. Like the way you might categorize food, for example, like in a scientific lab, like it might make more sense to categorize it, say, this way with cruciferous vegetables, nuts and legumes, as opposed to say carbs, fats, protein, which might work in some scientific contexts but not others. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm just saying, what is an example of like concepts where the essential characteristics will that we know of where, okay, in this context, this is the essential characteristic, and in this context, this is the essential characteristic of that same entity.
I can think of the concept force in physics,
Force?
like it is force equals mass times acceleration, but that's really abstract and not really any sense of what we normally think of as force. I
Yeah,
mean, force is just like you're using effort to
yeah.
make something move, or like that's all it really is. I mean, like you're dealing with the same concept either way, but what you're deeming as essential to the definition, or you're deeming as essential to what you're thinking about. And the hard part there is that essential, you still want to refer to the same thing for both concepts. Um, Essential is really just about an attribute of a entity or object that explains the most things about it, which I don't think is necessarily dependent on what you're trying to figure out, but the definition would depend on what you think is fundamental in that situation. Like you define
What do you mean?
force, like a physicist needs to define force differently than I need to, because they need a specific quantitative way to express it. And they're trying to focus on different aspects of force. But usually, if you're thinking of force, you just need to figure out how much energy do you need to push a wheelbarrow up a ramp or something like that. You don't need that really complex nature things. You can think of it, define it in a completely different way.
Is
But
it the
what's
same
this?
concept though?
Yes, I would say it's the same concept.
Okay.
Same concept, but different definition. Definition isn't simply what we mean by a concept. A definition is more like what aspect of the conscious of the concept are we focusing on? And that's the part that could vary. But essential, also importantly here, is not metaphysical, as Peikoff said. It's epistemological in the sense that we're trying to perform a certain cognitive function for human conceptualization. It's not that it's out there in reality. It's not merely they don't exist in reality and we perceive them, we perceive them. We have to form them and create them. Essentials aren't out there. We have to make it in our mind. We have to, or at least we have to find the relationship that is the essential. And if we use the right methods, we'll get an objective basis for your concepts.
So when it's saying the function is to differentiate and condense various bodies of data and the characteristics that perform this function in one cognitive context may not do so in another, it's not referring to the essence?
Let me reread this.
The essential in each context has to reflect the state of human knowledge.
Yes.
What's an example of an essence changing then?
Changing essence.
As in, not, like obviously the characteristics are still there in the entity, but like in that one context, I don't even know what would that look like? Like whether now we have a new essential that we use.
Maybe I could think of as, well, your mind could be change what you think of as essential. I mean, there's different ways to think of the mind.
What do you mean?
Well, there's different wrong ways to think about it, I mean to say. I'm just trying to understand what he means by the characteristics that perform this function in one cognitive context may not do so in another.
I'm gonna stop the recording, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah.